Welcome back to the Nose to Tail podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kraus, COO of Jet Midwest. I'm here with Bill. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing very well.
Yeah, I'm Bill. We've known each other for quite a while and have watched our career journeys go down similar paths. But I'd like to hear a little bit about your origin story, how you got into the business, and maybe fast forward yourself into today's experience.
Went to college, did the college route. Eventually, first job out of school happened to be aviation related. It was working for a defense contractor, actually, on a classified government program. And I realized after about a year, I didn't want to be doing that for a very long time. So I jumped across the field, Love Field in Dallas, and went to work for Aviol, which many people will remember. Aviol in its current form is nothing like it used to be because it had all the engine services division, parts distribution, everything all in one entity. Did that for a while. That's where I got familiar with engines and running engines through the shop and the customer support organizations and all of that. After that, I went to a company out in California called National Airmotive, which later was bought by Rolls-Royce. Out there, we were doing T-56 military engines for the C-130 aircraft. And then for a while there, I went to run a helicopter facility down in Southern California on their behalf. So touched that market as well. Also sold industrial engine services that were used for oil exploration and electrical cogeneration as well.
So this is as you pencil through that early part of your career, it's pretty fast. Well, first thing is you worked on some top secret stuff. Is that stuff still top secret?
No, not really, because it's probably part of our everyday vernacular, but I still am not allowed to say anything about it, I guess. But it's it was kind of at the time it was very hush hush, but now with modern technology, it's really not. But I have no idea whether that program's still going on, to be honest.
So it sounds like you started your career, were able to get a lot of diversity of items. I mean, what was it like switching from into the helicopter world? Tell us maybe a little bit about what the helicopter side of the business is, because
Sure.
I've nibbled at that and I didn't like the taste, so I spit the hook. So what was that?
Probably a good decision on your part. It's a different animal for sure, because you have, the director of maintenance may also be the owner of the helicopter company if it's small enough. And so sometimes you're dealing with one person that could be the pilot, the director of maintenance, and the owner. And they're usually in remote locations, whether they're doing tourism, whether they're doing firefighting, whether they're doing police work, law enforcement. It's just a different bunch of people to deal with, and really good people, down to earth type folks. But it's very fragmented market spread all over the place. And it was interesting. Let's put it that way.
So as we continue through your story, you finished off. It sounds like you were doing some sales of MRO services to the ground power. Now, were
Yes.
those commercial variant ground power units?
They were. So at National Airmotive, we were doing the T-56 engine, which is a military engine that's on the C-130s. But the commercial derivative of that is a 501K engine, which is industrial use only. And so we service that engine as well. And so we were dealing with the Texacos, the Shells, the people that had, they didn't want their facilities to go down because it was too costly. So they had backup generators and other things. And Texaco was using them for oil pumping and exploration efforts, mostly in California at the time. We also did some engines that worked on hydrofoils, which were transporting people all over the place in different places around the world. So the core of the engines were similar, of course, but the utilization and the usages of them were quite different. But it's interesting because industrial engines, of course, you don't have the same rules you do on the flight side. And
Right.
yeah.
So what if you could point to one big differentiator between how a MRO customer who's flying an aircraft versus the power generation side? What's the one big key differentiator that the folks could maybe understand a little bit?
I mean, in both cases, for a flight operation and or industrial operation, the cost of downtime is so substantial. Of course, if you can't get an aircraft off the gate, you've got real problems. Similar with the industrial side of things, if the power goes down in a location and you don't have backup generation systems in place, it's very costly. And I would say that the industrial operators tend to be knows that they don't worry about cutting back on expenses at that time if they've got to do something to get things back in service right away. But it's definitely a different, unique market for sure. It wasn't a huge market because, as you know, there's quite a few more flight engines out there than there are industrial use engines. But yeah, it was interesting. And I also did a little bit of that at GE falling into career-wise. We supported some of the LM series engines that were derivatives of the CF6. So the CF6 50C2, I think, is an LM 5000. Derivative of the CF6 80C2 is an LM 6000. And while I worked at GE Aviation Materials, we supported some of that activity as well within GE and then with third-party customers as well. So I do have a little bit of background in that industrial side.
Yeah, over the years, we've accidentally run into some of the material that was designated for the LM series engines, and I had no idea what I was looking at. I remember talking to my brother Paul about it, and I go, "I got these things, and it looks like an 8130, but it's green, and it says they're overhauled, and the part number's the same as the aviation variant, but the maintenance manual references and all those things were not coded for referencing the aviation variant." And so he's like, "No, those are great. Call this guy, call this guy." And, we found someone to buy them. Probably they got a great deal because we didn't quite have all the information on it. But,
Yeah.
certainly it was exciting for Paul to, wow, that's a good find to have in a aviation package basically that we had bought. So somebody there probably screwed up and bought the wrong ones, and we got to capitalize on that 5 years later.
No doubt at the risk of restating the obvious, obviously, if you have a flight part that goes out of goes out of service or outside the repair limits, you can typically repair some of those parts and use them in industrial applications, but you can't go the other way, obviously. So once it's got industrial usage, it can never be reused in a flight product. So I think
Yeah,
most people know that, but
sure. Accidents happen, and especially in large organizations, sometimes those things fall through the cracks and don't get corrected.
right.
So then you end up with GE.
Yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit about your jump into the commercial side in your career.
Sure. I'd always done some commercial work back at the Aviol days when running engines through the shop for airlines and all that. But I worked with a small parts company called TPI Aviation in 1999. And it was, I'd say 6 to 8 months later, we ended up getting purchased by GE, the Aircraft Engines Group. And then they rebranded and called us GE Aviation Materials in June of 2000, I believe. And so I had all the sales group and the product line folks and all of that while I was at GE. And most of our mission early on was to make sure that we had the facilities within the GE engine services network set up to be able to acquire used parts through GE Aviation Materials. So we set up pricing structures and found engines, ripped them apart, sent parts to GE Selma, sent parts to GE Wales, sent parts to GE Caledonia, GE Malaysia. And so we got that set up because what they were finding was while they did a lot of engines under cost per material type arrangements, they were losing out on some of the time and material engine opportunities. And so the thinking was that they have more used parts available that they could support that customer base as well. So yeah, I stayed there for a while. I enjoyed it thoroughly, learned a lot about what it's like to work for an OEM, which is I figured it was another feather in the cap, so to speak. And then after that, I went to work for a small company here based in Dallas called NTE Aviation, which was primarily regionally oriented, but we brought on some commercial activity with them. We brought in some new engines that we parted out, and we did some other things, and we put some aircraft on lease with them and all of that. And it is interesting to go from working for an OEM where everybody wants to be your friend to working for a small company like NTE where nobody knows who you are. So I've been on both ends of the spectrum there. So I have an appreciation for people that work for small companies and large companies because it can be challenging sometimes to get people to listen to you when you're with a smaller company.
Yeah, you and I probably could name some names in our career of folks who've maybe been with a large airline MRO their whole career, and they appear at the surface level to be very accomplished. And
Right.
When as soon as they leave and that logo on their business card changes, their career starts to really get challenged to be successful because it's a lot harder out there, to your point, than people think, and that
Yes.
name carries weight. A lot of those big companies, there's great support structures there for you. There's a reason why they're successful, but sometimes it doesn't translate to the aftermarket world. And clearly, you've had skills that you brought from those places that you're able to bring into some of those other environments. And those skills are allowed you to be successful. So, if you could say what was that key thing that you took away from that part of your career that you were able to bring to NTE that set you apart a little bit, what was that?
I'd say the ability to actually look at an asset and get down into the granular level and figure out what it's worth by going through and doing all the modeling on what repair costs would be, the resale pricing that you can get, figuring out scrap yields to back into a purchase price that made sense to make a margin that that the company would be happy with. And so having those detailed skill set, I think has done well for me over the years, just because it means you're not a generalist. You actually have some knowledge about the specific products. And
Yeah.
of course, while being with GE, of course, I learned a lot about the CF6, the CFM, CF34, the ones that they were supporting. And I think that having that skill set has been very good for me over the years. And the ability to, in a small company, to basically get an engine or review an engine, be able to do all the modeling on it with, good degree of success, and then be able to go forth, make the offer, buy the asset. It's almost like you can make yourself a one-stop shop. Now, you can't do that with bigger companies, but with smaller companies, you almost have to do that because you don't have the resources available to assist you. So that's one thing I think I've always taken with me is the ability to do that and understand the products that we service down to the granular level. Of course, you lose that after a while if you don't stay at it, but
Yeah.
it has
Yeah.
it has served
It's that
me
currency,
well.
right?
Yes,
Yeah, you
exactly.
gotta stay current, and,
Yep.
I would certainly say that Jet Midwest as a company, our growth really has been, um, to your point, the analysis that we do is pre-acquisition,
Right.
and
Yeah.
understanding what your yield's gonna be helps you develop, "How do I make an offer on this that makes sense?" And it doesn't matter whether that's an airplane or an engine or an APU or even a landing gear, if you're gonna look at it as one of the monetization paths to be a dismantle, you better understand what those piece parts are. And frankly, a build you have to understand just as well. In our careers, we've been more of a dismantle company than
Right.
a build company. And then the last handful of years, we start reactivating airplanes and fixing engines and doing things. So it's been an interesting learning curve for us to bring, again, having to have that expertise in advance to actually executing the plan.
Sure.
So,
One thing about that too, I was just gonna say one other thing to add there is, it's a point, that I always like to emphasize, stay true to your models. If it turns out that you wanna bid $2,000,000 for an asset and the going rate is, they got other offers at 2.3, 2.4, don't just arbitrarily put other parts in your model. You either take it at a lower margin, or there might be opportunities where you see some room for improvement, but, once you start to, question the integrity of your modeling, I think all kinds of bad things can happen from that.
yeah, that's a good point. Dealing with mid to end of life engines and airplanes, talk to me about where maybe the marketplace has the biggest disconnect on how they're analyzing those and how they're bringing those assets in.
Well, we do a lot of currently anyway. We evaluate a lot of assets. I think last year we looked at like 1,400 assets. A lot of them end up being
Wow.
no bids, but we go through them in detail. Some of them get discarded right away if it's a product line that we're not looking at. And the one thing I think what's changed a lot is the avenues that people have when they go to sell an asset. It's so much easier to go to a wider array of companies to get bids back. So you're dealing with that. It's very rare now to get inside track on something where you might be one of only two bidders going after an asset, unless it's an out of favor asset. Then you can do that, right? I guess I've seen
I've got
nowadays
an
there's
I've got an L-1011 that's a museum piece if you're interested.
sure.
Throw
Yeah,
in the
I bet you do.
727 expert as well.
Well, you're in trouble once it's more valuable to the museum than it is to the, aviation population. So, uh, Yeah, I mean, it's just today's environment's quite different. The pricing, with the delays with some of the newer product lines, newer aircraft, people are holding on to their older equipment longer. Because of that, there's not as much out there in the market, I guess, available for purchase. And when you do find something that is for purchase, it tends to be a little bit more expensive than you're going to probably think it's worth. And I think some of that is there's newcomers that get into the market, right? They do their modeling, but if they haven't purchased 10 of that asset before, they might be putting value on parts that perhaps you and I wouldn't be putting value on. So it's a little bit different equation. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of now, and you probably are as well, we'll go in and look to do a part out bid on an asset, and we'll find that we're competing with someone that's looking at it as a rebuild candidate because the value of serviceable assets is so high. You can take and mix and match modules, say off a CFM 56-7B, take an LPT from one, an HPC from another, a fan section, and combine them and make an asset that could have a value that's, over $10 million. I said I wouldn't say numbers and I just did. But
Ah, it's
anyway,
okay. You're just
yeah,
it's all fiction. It's that round number of 10,000,000.
there you go.
I'll take a look at that deal. We can throw that in the cauldron of thought. Um,
So yeah, I think it's a little
yeah,
different
you're absolutely
environment.
right.
Yeah.
And we've seen the same thing, and in our careers occasionally as well. Part of that also depends on the amount of capital that's in the marketplace. Uh,
Right.
you know, Certainly the capital in 2020 and 2021 looked different than it does today, and looked different than it did in 2005. So
Yeah.
that's also a factor. And I do like your philosophy of saying, stay true to your modeling. And
Oh yeah.
um, we've bought, sold, leased, torn down somewhere in the range of 700 plus airframes in our career.
Right.
And when I look back at it, there are very few that I look at and go, man, we shouldn't have done that one.
Right.
It probably made money, but it probably was a big burden on the organization at the time. And we've probably had a couple of those projects that we've done that I look back, and to your point as well, they were opportunistic buys, not necessarily our core product lines.
Right.
But we've also had those be winners. We were one of the first people to ever get into the Fokker F-100. If we tore down the first airplane ever, and ventured into a market that we had no idea about. How do you do analytics on those parts? I mean, it was very, very difficult.
Sure.
And took a giant leap after the first one to grab 5 more, and then once we were embedded in it, it was a really good marketplace for us. Niche couple, 285 airplanes produced in the life of the fleet, and not that many operators. So the business development sales side, they were new customers for the most part, and we had to have an acquisitions, but it turned out really well. And then again, we've got a couple other fleet types that we went into that were like, that didn't act like the Fokker. These
Yeah.
customers don't pay their bills, and they're kind of bottom feeders, and we're probably too late to get into this fleet type. So we've learned some tough lessons there, and to your point, staying true to who you are is got to be pretty important.
Well, and when I deal with a lot of younger folks that come into the organization that on the asset trading side and acquisitions, one thing to remind them of is sometimes the best. This sounds trite, but sometimes the best deal is the one you didn't do because you maybe didn't have everything in line. You're aggressive, you want to get it, but if your models aren't up to speed and you're not as familiar with the product, sometimes you're better off to not do a deal, and that doesn't always sit well with people. But it's not a bad thing to keep in mind that sometimes that's the best deal you did is the one you didn't do.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I had an aircraft get offered to me right as we were exiting from COVID, and we were quite busy with the 777 growth we were having. This particular Airbus, and I told the guy, I go, not only am I not going to buy it, if you gave it to me, I don't think I would take this airplane
yeah,
because it's going to get in the way. Now I would have made money, but it would have been again a burden to the rest of the system and maybe clog something else up. And I don't regret. It
yeah,
was just short of free, um,
yeah, right.
and
Yeah, but
someone else ended up biting off on that project, and
yeah.
I'm sure they made a couple of bucks on it, but again, didn't
But you and I also know that free isn't always good. I'm thinking back to GE when they were doing work for FedEx on the CF6-6 engines, the real old ones, and they were retiring the fleet, and they were trying to get GM to take all the engines, and we're like, why. If we park that thing out, we're going to spend more in part out money than we could yield on any sale. And so, sometimes it sounds like it's too good to be true. Usually it is. Just even with a price tag of zero, it didn't make sense.
Yeah, we've also evolved as our company evolved, right? So from inception until 2010, we were a warehouse company, and we were a parts provider. We had a warehouse. We had tear down operations in California. Uh, when we moved to the overhaul base here in Kansas City and took this big leap to take over this big, it's a city. It's 1 million+ square feet that we've got, and by doing that, it also expanded our ability to hold material longer because our holding cost was different. So now instead of having projects that we would anticipate to last for 18 months, now we've got projects that could last 3 years or more because we can hold the material because our holding cost was spread out like butter. And as we continue to grow, that was great. And now we've gotten to the point where we're almost in the opposite. Like, shoot, we filled the place up with stuff on these longer term tails, right? So you have a spike in sales and then it slowly starts to glide off. And now we're having to shorten some of those sales cycles and basically put the parts through a recycling process to get dispose of them.
Yeah.
We're going to have to be better at analysis because we're not going to have that extra tail all the time. Sometimes we will, but not all the time are we going to get that long tail of monetization that we're afforded because we've got hangars and we've got apron and we've got a massive building.
Yeah, no, that's a nice advantage having that capability. And at EirTrade here, we have a facility in Knock, Ireland with similar where we tear down a lot of airframes and aircraft. And as you know, the nice part of it is if you go to a third party for a tear down, you got to get everything torn down and removed right away and get it shipped out. Of course, if you've got it sitting there at your facilities, you've got a little bit more leeway on the timing of getting all that done. And of course, you're going to go after your components that'll monetize the quickest, and then you can get to the other ones a little bit later. So it gives you a definite advantage from that standpoint.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. What airport is that facility at?
It's called Knock, and it's on the west coast of Ireland, and it's got like a, I don't know, 7,000 square foot or 7,000 foot runway there, believe it or not. And so we've had A380s land there.
Wow.
Yeah. And
How big is the town?
not very big, not very
Probably
big.
can fit inside the A380.
Quite possibly. I should know more about Knock. I don't, but I don't think it's a very big town. And I know when people ferry aircraft in there that, we do what we can to help them get transportation but it's not a very good sized city, and it's not as easy as it sounds to do that. But it gives us the advantage of being able to do what you were just describing in Kansas City to some extent. So, getting back to the career thing, one thing I didn't, I ended up working at Delta for a while. I know you and I spent some time while I was there. The one nice thing about that was gaining an airline perspective. So after, 20 something years or more, I had never really worked within an airline before. And granted, it was Delta Material Services where we were acquiring aircraft and engines and things of that nature. But the view from the airline is quite a bit different than the view that the supplier has. And I have to say that being inside of that and learning about that has helped me a lot too, career-wise, to understand airlines and what it's all about. And a lot of it, of course, as you know, is cost per available seat mile, the CASMs and all of that. And everything's usually driven towards that goal, is to keep your CASM as low as possible. And so, I used to question some of the decisions that were made within the airlines. And then after learning this, I get why certain things happen the way they do. So that's
Now,
been handy too, to learn that.
yeah, I always remember hearing great stories because you guys built and invested in DMS as as a parts company. That was a
Yes.
tremendous speed of growth. And I remember hearing stories about like we ran out of places to put engines, so they're in the bottom stairwell of some of the buildings. You slide a narrow body engine underneath the stairs at the bottom. There's some space there.
Yeah.
Literally stuff everywhere. Hundreds of pallet boxes of stuff you guys bought that I don't know if they ever even opened the box. It was an interesting journey for you guys.
No doubt. I mean, and yes, it was to sell off all of Delta's surplus material, which previously had been outsourced to a contractor to do. So that was brought in house. But the primary function, I would say, was more to buy green time assets and bring them in as opportunities to displace shop visits. And so that was kind of the thinking is if you could go out and buy a serviceable asset in the market for less than maybe the cost of overhauling that engine, and then if you looked at it over a period of 5 or 6 years, which represented the best alternative? Would you be better to buy a serviceable engine, or would you be better to fix yours in-house and put it on wing? And so a lot of times it made more sense to overhaul the engine on our own at Delta Tech Ops and not acquire that one in the market. But many times, especially on like Rolls-Royce products, you could find serviceable assets for reasonable prices in the market and bring those in and displace a shop visit that was going to be incredibly expensive. And so that's a lot of what DMS was created for, which was the old things that they did at Northwest Airlines way back in the day before Northwest and Delta merged. So that same mindset came down and was used in essence to create the Delta Material Services and what our charter was. So that was interesting experience too along the way.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned the Rolls-Royce engines, which is, Jetman West has been,
Right.
we've always fancied the Rolls-Royce product line. Maybe you can elaborate on your perspective as to the nuanced reasons why green time Rolls-Royce solutions seem to always be in the marketplace.
Um, I think that, part of it was, and you know this probably better than I, the part out values of a lot of the Rolls product lines are not significant. It seems to be that the values are on LRUs, fan blades, things of that. And I think part of it was because they were so successful with the total care programs that they were offering to customers. In a way, it kind of hurt the aftermarket because the value of a part out engine really didn't have as much value because you'd have to go back to Rolls to get it serviced. But the green time engines that were out there, sometimes you could pick them up cheap. I don't think you could do that as much anymore. This is going back a few years. But at the time, the difference between the value of a serviceable engine, say midlife, quarter life remaining, was reasonably inexpensive compared to the cost of overhauling one of your own. So it was, at least on the Trent 800 series back when Delta was operating them, we were finding that there was opportunities there to find engines at less than what the operating would cost would be associated with fixing the existing engine. So we noticed that. I don't know the Trent 700 series as well, but on the Trent 800s, that definitely was an opportunity for us for sure.
Yeah, the Trent 800, we're neck deep into that product line right now, and actually have built out some capabilities to solve some of those problems ourselves. And it's not too dissimilar. It's just too expensive to invest in an overhaul.
Right.
And but if we can find ways to put engines back out in the market by putting them in the shop for a minor repair, we've basically said we've got to build this, otherwise we're not going to be able to monetize our airplanes. We have airplanes and engines to lease and sell, and
Right.
so we had to be a little bit self-sustaining, if I could spit that out. Jeez. But again, I think Rolls-Royce, it's an important point that I think the Rolls-Royce products, for the most part, across fleet types, have been good engines. They're
Oh,
good
no
engines.
doubt. Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about, the Rolls-Royce program really driving the way that the aftermarket behaves. I hadn't really contemplated it that way, but that does make sense because, um, it's a very speckled market. There's not very many of us out there in the aftermarket parts. And even in a decade ago and 2 decades ago, in several of the product types, Rolls-Royce, there just wasn't a ton of aftermarket guys
Right.
compared to the GE and CFM models.
No, I think what you're doing with the Rolls program and taking a modular approach and doing not full blown repairs, as people come off the total care program, they're looking for alternatives, and the alternative many people don't want to do is go back to Rolls on a T&M basis to induct that shop
Yeah.
visit. And so, if you can offer a solution that saves them money, gets it back out, I think it's brilliant on your part doing that. And you're right, it is a strong engine. I know on the A330, on the freighter conversion market, the Trent seems to be the engine of choice, not the GE engine at the moment. But They are strong engines, and I think from a operational perspective, they're very good. It's just the aftermarket sometimes is very difficult.
Yep. Yeah, it probably keeps some people away.
Yes.
And here at
Yeah.
Jet Midwest, we don't mind a little pain. That's kind of how we get successful because we're sadists or something. I don't know, something
Yeah.
crazy.
We always
Um,
say that we gotta look for deals that have hair on them, something that's, out
that's
of the
right.
norm, that's gonna be difficult to solve for because not everybody's gonna do it. So
So all the listeners now know Bill's secret sauce on his 1,400 deals he got offered last year is he's looking for the ones with hair on them. So they
there you
just
go.
gave the whole thing away. But that's very true. In fact, you and I did a deal when you were with Delta on 6 MD-11s,
That's right.
um, where Jet Midwest actually wasn't the high bidder on the project, and the person that was the high bidder struggled to execute on the deal. And I think I just happened to be in Atlanta, and the two of us got together, and you're like, "Remember those airplanes from last year?" I was like, "Yeah," and he goes, "You want to buy those?" I said, "Sure."
Yeah, I
He said,
think that I
"Good
forgot
deal."
where
I
we
said,
got those
"Sure."
from. I can't remember where we got them from originally, to be honest. They came from I think we ended up like 18 of them, and
Yeah.
Delta's move on that was to take the D1Fs in and do the conversion to B6F. But
Yep.
there were some of them that weren't suitable for doing that conversion. Of course, that conversion is not technically in the GE manuals, but Delta Engineering was able to come up with the work specification to do the conversion. And so I think the ones that you ended up with were the ones that we didn't need, or we didn't need to do any more conversions, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So for our listeners out there, Bill's referring to the CF680C engine, and there are several variants of that engine because it went on a lot of different airplanes. It went on 767s, 747s. Obviously, it was on the MD-11s that we purchased. It's actually there's a CF680E that's on the A330s we were just discussing. So, you guys were converting essentially an MD-11 engine to fit onto either your 747s or 76s. And I think at the time
correct.
it was the 76 fleet that you were focused on.
Right.
Um, and, it's like, "Yeah, let's just put the deal together." So, I didn't need to
Yeah.
change anything. I felt like you, I felt very comfortable with the analytics we put together on that, and, that was a pretty successful deal.
Yeah.
The MD-11 market looks a little different today, than it did then. But,
Yes.
you know now, it's a good, interesting dialogue on the variants of engines on different fleet types, and
Right.
sometimes a very, very close engine. Sometimes maybe it's a variant. So the Trent 800, Trent 700, RB211 524 engines all have some similar design as they evolved through time. I know that you did. I'm gonna call on your expertise in the Wayback Machine. You were doing V2500 engines that were traveling between MD-90 to um, an Airbus variant or vice versa.
A320. Yeah,
Maybe
no.
tell that story about what that looked like. I think that was pre-Delta, and then
It was.
and
Yeah.
then it was also Delta.
Yeah, it was. I was working for Air Sale at the time, and we bought the Saudi fleet of MD-90s when they were retiring them. And a lot of people thought we were a little bit crazy to buy MD-90s in the first place, but I don't think everybody realized that, and I think people know it now, but at the time, that the D5 engine, there's a lot of commonality with the A5 that was, one of the choices for the A320s. And so a lot of the LLPs crossed over, HPT blades, other things. There's certain parts on the D5 that didn't. And of course, for configuration issues, because the engine's attached differently to the frame, there were certain cases and other things that wouldn't cross over. But the guts of the engine, for the most part, crossed over pretty well. So the thinking was buy those out of Saudi, tear them down, and then sell parts back into those that were, going through A5 shop visits. And we had pretty good success with that. There was some squawking a little bit early about the environment that they operated in being ex-Saudi. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of other material available in the market. And you probably know this better than anybody. If there's not a lot of availability, it's always surprising how customers will accept the trace and not worry about the harshness of where they operated. But if you've got an abundance of material in there, then people can pick and choose and get more selective about it. So at the time, we had pretty good success selling that material back into MRO facilities because there wasn't a lot of it available. And so that was successful. And then same thing with Delta. When I was there, they decided to retire the MD-90s. This time I was on the selling side of it, where we were selling off a lot of the surplus engines, and other people were fully aware of the commonality with the D5 and the A5. And it ended up being a good deal for Delta to unload those engines, especially given that a lot of people in Delta didn't realize that there was value in those engines at all. And I think they weren't familiar that the guts of the engine could cross over to the A5 variant. So it was a win-win for everybody on that situation. So yeah, crazy.
You definitely earned your salary and all your compensation with that tribal knowledge that you bought. I mean, it really is such a valuable piece in the marketplace. As you look forward for EirTrade, is there additional product line you're going to go after? Is there any global expansion in your future?
Possibly. We talked about maybe putting some warehousing capabilities over in Asia. We don't have any at the moment. We do have people over there selling, and a gentleman that's on the asset side that is based out of Singapore. That's part of it. New product types, sure. There's other ones we're looking at that would be new to us, but of course it's getting to the right price points and all of that, which becomes challenging. So I could see definitely adding some additional product lines to the mix. And then even some of the stuff that's out of favor, we're looking at, because some of these assets still keep hanging around because it delays in new deliveries. And, whereas we may have written it off 5 years ago, there might be an opportunity now to go back in and buy some of those assets to support the remaining fleet because they're still out there. So we're looking at all options, I guess, in fairness. We've morphed more into doing airframes the last couple of years. We still have bought engines as well, but the mix is split for sure. And part of it is just because the values have been so high that we haven't been able to justify it. And I say the other thing we're doing is we look more at buying engines that have green time remaining, more so than we did before. And part of that is having access to capital. We were bought by a private equity company, Acorn, in October 2023, which gave us some access to capital. And they have a company within the family that helps us on the capital side. But we also have aligned with financial partners as well that have an interest, and we could co-invest on assets as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of things changing and evolving at EirTrade, and it's been kind of fun, and it's been enjoyable. But I do see, we definitely have an entrepreneurial spirit like you do, and I think we'll look at anything to see if there's something that works for us, it's in line with what we're trying to do and grow the company. So nothing's really off the table, but you got to be selective about what you devote your resources towards chasing as well. You don't want to go down a rabbit hole of spending all kinds of time and effort on something that isn't going to work out either. So, yeah.
Well, certainly as they start turning into firefighter trainers and museums, we'll avoid those product lines. So that's a nugget for everybody out there. When you start to see them in those ballparks, you better be paying below aluminum prices. So, Bill, I ask all of my folks on the podcast that join me, I always ask them what their favorite aircraft is and why. And for you, I'm gonna add a layer into that because you've had such a dynamic engine background in your career. I'd like to know first, what is your favorite engine? What's the one, man, when you look back, you go, that was fun, or that was special to me. Help us understand what that is and why it was so special.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I'll tell you one that I worked on that, most people maybe that listen to this won't even know, was a JT3Ds. And these were on the 707s. And when I was at Avio, I handled the presidential fleet engines. At the time, the 707 was the Air Force One. And so we were doing the engines for the Air Force on that. And that's where I cut my teeth. That's where I learned when the engines got torn down and when they went through bench inspection, and we had the government representatives coming in to verify that everything was needed to be replaced, was going to be replaced. Everything had to go on repair, was going to go on repair. It's kind of got a soft spot for me simply because I learned that engine more than I ever wanted to because of the level of detail that we had to get into with the government to justify the quotes. And we had to firm fixed price the quotes once they came out of bench inspection. which was unheard of at the time, because there's a lot of risk associated with doing that. And so that one was one that I enjoyed simply because it was my first one that I learned on. The other one and I didn't really mention much of this, I used to sell business aviation services as well when I worked at Sabreliner for a while. And the engine that I always thought if I had a bunch of cash to go off and start my own parts business, it would have been on the TFE 731 engine, which is on a lot of older business jets because that's a full retail market. What we deal with in the large commercial side, I mean, we get beat down on pricing and we're selling into an MRO that's reselling to an airline and all of that. And but when you're dealing with the business jet community, uh, the problem is getting them to accept used parts. But if you can do that, you can sell used parts for quite a bit of money on that product line, and that was interesting. That was an interesting sector to work on too, the corporate
Yeah.
aviation side.
Is that the Falcon 900 engine?
Um, it was on the Falcon 50 for sure. There was a bunch of versions of the TFE 731. There was like a dash 20, a dash 40, dash 60. There was a dash 2, dash 3, dash 5, and they all went on different variants and different aircraft type. It was probably 60% of the market back in the 90s with that engine type. And so
I
most of those business jets had it on there.
I think it is, and
Yeah.
we did a project for an investor, and ended up with some Falcon 900 engines that came with less than stellar documentation. I think I still have them sitting upstairs in some state or another. Uh,
Yeah.
maybe there's something there I'll pick your brain on offline. And then obviously the big question we ask everybody is what's their favorite aircraft and why? And again, love to hear your take on it.
Is that from a part out perspective or from a flying perspective?
And however you want it to be.
I spent a lot of times early in my career, and you probably did as well, flying MD-80s. And that thing was a workhorse of American's fleet. And being based in Dallas most of my life, I was on those planes all the time. And I just was amazed too. We did the JT8 engines over at Aviol as well. And those things, you could throw a wrench through them and they'd still operate, it seemed like.
Yeah.
I don't know. They were built differently for sure. But that wasn't the most luxurious aircraft, but it sure was efficient and sure got you from point A to point B without too many problems. And so I enjoyed flying those.
Yeah. Being in Kansas City, that was a big piece of Kansas City as well, right? So
Right.
between TWA, Delta,
TWA,
and American, there are MD-80s everywhere. And early in my aviation career, I certainly cut my teeth on teardowns on MD-80s because there were a lot of them,
Yeah.
and they were kind of cheap. So we ended up in that marketplace. So I too love the airplane, and it is that McDonnell Douglas product was like a flying tank from a commercial aircraft perspective. It was very robust, and again, wasn't a luxury airplane. Um,
No.
I always loved going to inspect them because it has a tail door, or a tail stairs, so you can lower the tail and have entry stairs there, which was unique in the commercial marketplace, that you could actually enter the aircraft from the aft end and just walk up a flight of stairs, and there you are. You're in the aircraft, and
Well, yeah.
certainly have a lot of novelty to it. So
And
it's
for
amazing.
years, yeah, and for years after, working at Aviol back in the late 80s, early 90s, I thought I was done with them. And then when I showed up, when we were at Delta, one of the tasks we had was to unload the MD-80 aircraft because Delta was the last man standing with those.
Yeah.
I think American exited just before, and they were trying. I remember the guys at American were trying to get us to take their JT8 engines because they couldn't get rid of them quite yet. They were on some kind of a lease arrangement. But yeah, we ended up having to sell all those off, and that was it was like what goes around comes around, I guess. So
Yep. Well, when you squeeze them for as long as Delta squeezed them, I'm pretty sure that the valuation that you got at the end, which probably wasn't very happy for their folks, but with as many people as they've flown in its cycles, I'm sure they monetized those as efficiently as they could have.
well, I'd say one thing Delta did a very good job of is if they knew that they were going to be retiring their fleet, say 3 years out, they'd build an engine to last 3 years. They wouldn't build it to last 10. And so when it got to the point when they were going to exit from the fleet, they weren't overvaluated. they weren't overexposed on valuations, I guess. So they're pretty smart about that. I have to say they did a good job on that.
Well, from an aftermarket guy's perspective, I'd like them to throw an extra couple of years in there for just an extra 5% more cost. Maybe you would recoup that at the end. Maybe people would
That's
flow
true.
those airplanes. So
That's
from an
true.
aftermarket guy, but to your point earlier, they're making decisions on what's best for Delta Airlines, the people that fly the people, and I think that that's their reasoning, and I would agree with you. Everything that you see come out of Delta is in that shape. That's why typically we're buying airframes from there, not engines anyway.
Not engines, yeah. No doubt.
Well, Bill, again, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of great stories you've told us. Is there any other stories you'd like to tell us before we finish up here today?
Well, I think you were kind of asking about one of these things where a missing detail changed everything. And yeah, I remember one of those. We were looking at I was at Air Sale at the time, and we were looking at a Japan airline portfolio of 17 747-400s that operated internationally. And I was doing the review on all the records and coming up with a valuation on what we would pay for the airframes and the engines. And then afterwards, we were going to decide, do we part this one out? Do we lease it? Do we resell it? Do we do all these type things? So I'd gone through all the records in detail on the, whatever that is, 17 times 4, 30, 68 engines I'd gone through, and I'd loaded all in the LOP data. I thought, yep, good to go. It's Thanksgiving one year. I'm working over the Thanksgiving break to get it done because the bids were due. And then I get this email that has to do with the K factor. I'm like, what's the K factor? And then I realized, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Japan Airlines and ANA both got some liberties because of the short cycles that they operated these aircraft, that they didn't have to take full exposure to the cycles. And so the K factor, so if they actually operated 10,000 cycles, for instance, it could be that the K factor indicates they only operated 7,000. But when you go to sell that part, people are going to say it operated 10,000 cycles. And so it was a last minute change that changed the entire evaluation on 68 engines. And I don't know, the K factor is not something that's widely discussed. It was something that was a GE thing that was specifically with JAL and ANA. But I could have not been in this career 20, about 15 years ago. That mistake would have gone forward if I hadn't corrected it. So
That's great. And it really does show you that the level of expertise that it takes. There's so much to know on the acquisition side when you're buying full assets. And
no doubt.
it's no doubtedly saved your bacon and the company's bacon. And hopefully, did you get the deal done?
We did. We got the deal done, and the company did really well with it. Just with buying, selling, trading. Leased out a bunch of those assets, parted out a bunch, and it kept them going for a few years. Activity with all those engines. So it ended up working out, but it was scary at the time. But
yeah. Well, again, Bill, I appreciate all the stories. This has been a great dialogue. I know our listeners are going to enjoy it. To all the listeners out there, thank you to Bill for being on here. Some pearls of wisdom. We appreciate you listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. And, this has been awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Nose to Tail. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Presented by Jet Midwest.